I was very pleased to come into this exhibition that was so lovingly put together with Jane and Mary previous to me. Jane has a long storied history in Ohio in the arts and has done a phenomenal job of organizing this exhibition, and I can't wait for you all to experience the thought and the work that went into this exhibition, not only in curation, but also how the artists were selected and why in the work as well. So without further ado, this is Jane A. Black, and she's going to take you through this phenomenal exhibition, Thread Count.
Thank you, guys. Am I on?
Yes.
Am I on? Thank you all for coming. It's very exciting to have such a big crowd and on such a rainy day. I am going to tell you about how I created the show, how I arranged the show, and some things about the artists. I am going to try to not repeat all of the written information, just as you can read that yourself, and also because that would keep you here much too long. So if you have questions, please feel free to speak up. I love conversation, and one of the things I will say is that what you are going to hear is my interpretation of the work. You know, I hope I don't misrepresent anyone. One of the things that is important to understand is that all of these artists have a very strongly developed vision and practice that goes well beyond math. Their work is not just about math. It was something I saw in their work that I wanted to bring out to the public, because I think it's interesting to talk about different aspects of work. So it started about a year and a half, 2 years ago, a while ago. Ken Emmerich and Mary Gray, the former gallery director and former director of individual grants at the Ohio Arts Council, both of who have retired happily and worked here for a very long time, came to me with the idea of curating a show that was a fiber show, that was not a quilt show, for the Riffe Gallery. And in talking about that, we wanted to, we were talking about titles, and we talked about Threadbare, but there had just been an exhibition in Cincinnati that was curated by a friend of mine, Kate Bonasinga, who's at DAP, that was called Unraveled, that was wonderful, and I didn't want to repeat that. And then we talked about thread count, and that brought to mind for me the idea of math and art. Math and fiber in particular, having a background as a fiber artist, as a maker, I know you use a lot of calculation when you sew or weave or do any kind of fiber work. You're using fractions, you're using calculation. So that was the thing that started it. And then it went pretty far afield from that. It was interesting to try to find artists who had some connection to math. Many that I talked to, many fiber artists who I knew did not have a connection to math. And so, unfortunately, I couldn't include them in the show. I did find people who I don't think I would have found otherwise. And so that was a real joy and pleasure to meet the artists who were in the show. They come from all over the state. They are living Ohio artists. The work has been created in the last 5 years. And I did a studio visit with each one. So I drove all over Ohio, and I visited their studios, and we talked about their work, and I chose pieces. And then I had the task of figuring out, well, how do I make this something that people can understand, that has a path, a narrative? And so what I chose was to talk about how we learn math, how math comes to us, how math is used in our world, how we encounter math, and to kind of use the art, in a sense, to tell that story. So at this point, we'll just walk around the gallery, and just you can come closer so that you can see what I'm talking about, or you can wander off and just imagine what it is that I'm talking about. I do not care. So I started with Deborah Bewley's work, who is from Bowling Green, from the northwest corner of the state. And she is a minimalist and very interested in texture in her mixed media work. You know, if you look at each individual piece, they certainly are not minimalist in that there are many, many different materials beautifully worked together. The reason I chose them is not for their minimalism, but because they are physical objects. And that's how we first learn math. We count things, we put them in grids, we figure out which one's bigger and smaller and which one will fit into the right shape of the box that we're given. So all of us start with this physical idea of math. And each one of these objects is something you can count. So that was how her work relates to math, even though obviously that's not all that it is about. And then, after we learn about things through objects, yeah.
Are you going to move to another artist?
Yeah.
Okay, may I ask a question about this?
Sure.
I'm curious about your process. Was her work already mounted this way, or did you collaborate with her to mount it this way?
No, it was already, these are finished pieces
Okay.
that were created before. There are a number of pieces in the show that were created for the exhibition, which I'll point out, but this work was already
So she's thinking
in
about these
existence.
grids and the work.
Yes, although her concept, you know, as I said, I'm going to tell you what I think and what I saw more than what the artist saw, because I don't want to speak for them or mischaracterize their work. She's always been very interested in architecture, she told me, and so there is a very strong sense of the work as a grid, as a minimalistic expression of geometry, geometric principles. I think that is fair to say about her work. So we're going to move on to the next artist, Petra Sussman, who is from Cleveland and has a very long and distinguished exhibition history, both in quilts and in other fiberworks. She's very interested in the specific and how it speaks to the universal. She's very interested in ancient cultures and how they use art to talk about life. These works I encountered at the Cleveland Clinic at a little show there, and I was absolutely stunned by them, partially for their precision. They're just so ethereal and so beautifully created. They are layered, translucent fabrics that then create additional layers of color. They are, for me, within the context of this show, about how we move from understanding and manipulating math as objects to seeing it as a two-dimensional form, seeing it as a volume that we can express through math, through a two-dimensional picture. Additionally, they have this Escher-esque quality of kind of moving your eye back and forth and you see different things, and the shapes morphing in different ways. So this is Petra Sussman's work. Yes, did you have a question? No, I thought you were
stroking
but you're raising your hand. So those are kind of the early parts of learning about math, where we're going from objects to we're going to paper, and then we go into that mind-blowing part where there's multiplication and division and all those things that are a lot harder to understand, and our minds are opening and things are kind of breaking apart. And so this work, for me, talks about that moment where math becomes harder to understand and express and more hidden. It's starting to become less obvious. So Sandra Palmer Cialino's work, Sandra is from the Cincinnati area. She began quilting in the 90s and has really developed this practice through doing a lot of workshops and a lot of work on moving away from traditional quilting and traditional patterning and precise measurement to really starting to enter the idea of improvisation in a sense. And I think you see that in the work. It's beautifully crafted. It's very close to traditional quilt methodology, but it has such a different feel to it. And is so engaging and full of energy. which I think, is part of that learning process, when you finally get it. When you finally understand how to do multiplication, it's pretty exciting. So then on the opposite wall is work by Ian Ruffino, who's from Columbus and works at CCAD. He's the gallery director there. And he's a printmaker, has a printmaking background, but a very strong painting practice that's extremely conceptual. He makes his work, in a sense, it's an autobiography. He makes most of it out of clothing that he has worn. And he has gone for a long time, I don't know if he's still doing this, but he went for a very long time where all he would wear was the color blue. And so then he would take those clothes and he would cut them apart and he would re-piece them together and then he would paint on top of them and obscure the physical grid of the fiber, which fiber's a grid, but then also the stripes and the linear qualities of the fabric itself, and then he would superimpose. If you look at this one, there's a superimposed grid of threads across it. So you have two very different interpretations across from each other of how we might start to understand and still experience layers of say the word for me.
Obfuscation.
Thank you, obfuscation. It's my dictionary, my Scrabble partner, sort of. Yeah. So, yes.
Question about this, in terms of layering, was the fabric laundered at all, or is there a layer
I hope
of
so.
perspiration?
He wore it a lot. I think he laundered it a lot.
You did launder, you think?
I don't think he wore it without laundering.
Yeah.
Oh, you worked there. You know.
Yeah, so Ian wears the clothing until the point where he's ready for that clothing to be done. And then that clothing becomes his materials.
Okay.
Yeah.
So his perspiration said was part of the layering as well.
I would imagine that that's a piece of it, for sure. I mean, I'm pretty sure that he pops it in the laundry in between wears, but I should probably ask him.
No, you didn't.
Okay.
So, and I do want to point out that Sandra has another piece around the corner here. So, just don't miss that as we move forward. So this is Judy Cayley's work, who's also from the northwest corner from Wauseon, Ohio. And she was one of the artists that, she said, I don't have anything to do with math. I'm a storyteller. I started making these things to express what I have to say about life. But I saw math. I saw mathematical symbols. I saw a really strong ability to understand volume and shape in creating this form. And I loved this title, There's No Right Answer, because I think sometimes we think math is very clear and it's absolutely right, and I don't think that's always the case. I also wanted to include this work because this methodology she uses of machine stitching on canvas creates such a beautiful, amazing surface, so unique. I had never really seen anything made quite this way and that came out quite this beautifully. So that was part of my motivation, is just as fiber work, it was so spectacular. But also, I see times and plus and equals and minus in this work. So that's two things. I'm sorry.
Those curves are mathematical.
They are mathematical as well. Thank you. Yes, yes, they are equations. Yeah, that's right. So now we're moving into a place where there are some installations. The first of which is Amy Lee's. Amy Lee is from the Cleveland area, and she is an internationally renowned scholar in Korean papermaking techniques, Hanji in particular, a Fulbright Fellow, and also an artist who is interested in cultural context and history. And so this piece is inspired by a South American way of counting that comes from the 1400s. It's a Quechuan word, quipu, and so it's from the Inca culture, although there were other cultures that used quipu. You find them in museums. They are often displayed as threads coming off a main thread that are knotted. Somehow the knotting and the length tells you the calculation, but we don't know what it was. So they were used in trade. They were understood by multiple cultures in the way that math is a language that can cross languages that we can't speak together, but sometimes the meaning is still lost. Amy has used Korean papermaking techniques. She makes the paper from mulberry, she dyes the paper, she twists the paper, she knots the paper, and then she made this installation just for the show. So this is about money and trade, not money necessarily, but trade and understanding and not understanding and agreed upon values. And this work is as well. This work is by Christina Parema, and her work goes around the corner, but we're going to start with this one, which is a group of shapes that are taken from graphs, mostly from the Wall Street Journal, but not entirely. And they express many, many different things about financial matters. I'm just going to read the title to you. Financial data, winners, losers, stumbling, emerging, capital flows, M1 and M2, posting outsized one-day moves, EBITDA, seasonally adjusted, fixed, steady, moving average, resistance lines, upbeat chatter. Do you feel as if you've been with your financial planner? Yeah. I think most of us encounter these financial terms. We try, but we really don't understand our economy, which is all based in math. Christina takes these shapes, which she's drawn to visually. She excises the data. She reforms them and turns them and combines them in ways that create. Is it a little daunting still? Is it a little ominous? It is to me. I still read this in the way that I get confused by financial data. I don't know if it's because I know what it is or because that's how it comes out. So again, we've moved into this kind of using math in money, encountering math in our everyday life. We do understand it, we don't understand it. There are a couple more pieces over here about money. Yes?
I would just love to hear your interpretation of the blocks that seem like they have mirrored images of.
I'm just going to let Christina speak to it because she's standing right next to you.
Those are M2 money supplies from 2017 to 2018 from specific countries. They are just one side of it. And as I, just because I, disenfranchised them from their context, they just wanted to be, they want to be Rorschach tests. So like, what do you see here? And it was just visually more interesting. Yeah.
So, and since you've been found out, Christina, if you look at the back of Christina's shirt, that's also a graph.
Yeah, this is a new. Noon is at the middle. That's a chart of active shooters in the United States from 2000 to 2018, when they occurred. Mostly noon.
Can we turn?
Yeah, turn around, face the camera. or back of the camera. So you say, okay, stop, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you. So if you come around the corner, there's more of Christina's work. And so this piece is also about data, where what it is removed from the actual object. The title does give you a clue, unemployment by race and sex, but you don't know who's what where. And for me, this piece is really about that you have this very neat and tidy information on the back, but if you come around this side, life is messy. And what we see on the front, that data does not always fully express what is there. These are a couple of pieces, part of her series on money. You probably can see that this is actual money, which would make sense for a security blanket. But I'm gonna talk about something Christina probably, correct me if I'm wrong, but for me, this piece harkens to what she's told me about her cultural background and cultural practice in general, that we spend time making things like this when we're safe, when we're secure. That's when we have time to embroider. That's when we have time to sit and make things. So it's a security blanket in the sense that we can spend the time to make these objects. Opposite is the first piece we're going to talk about by John Leffelholtz, who's from the Athens area and has an engineering and graphic arts background. Very much of a math mind, but an accomplished artist as well, who does make quilts of all sorts. Very unusual and different methodology, very exacting. I saw this last summer for the first time in his studio, right at the time that we were going into the trade talks, or whatever you want to call it, between the United States and China. So to have their two currencies superimposed over one another, he had made it long before that, but it just really spoke to me at the moment. If you look closely, these are all sugar packets, but they're not actual sugar packets. This is all printed, stuffed, cut, and then sewn together. So it's a very exacting method that he uses to create this. If you then look even closer, you see the flies on here. They all, on their wings, have little sayings, which we are going to provide to gallery guests, so you can know what they are, or you can get really close and try to read them.
I want to say that I met John for the first time last night, and his first observation was, "Oh, it's 11 by 17, prime number." I was like, "No."
Was it really?
And he goes, "Did you put the mistake in on purpose?" Because he has a mistake in the upper left-hand corner. And it was just like his way of looking at things was like mathematical.
Really mathy.
Yeah, really mathematical.
Really mathy. That's what we call it, really mathy. So we're going to just step. We don't want to miss Mary's piece. This is the piece of the gallery that speaks to the idea of math and spirituality. It's meant as an altar, as a meditation spot, so you're welcome to sit and experience what is based on the golden ratio, which, if you remember, or if you don't, is when A has the same relationship to A plus B as B has to A. Is that clear? Yeah, Christina's going, no. That is the golden ratio, and that is the mathematical definition of the golden ratio. But the philosophical, ancient Greek philosophical definition of the golden ratio is that which is the exact middle between too much and too little. So it is the perfect place to be between excess and, give me the word, Christina, I can't come up with it. Anybody?
Scarcity.
Scarcity, thank you. That's the word. All right, it's a group effort, right? It takes a village to make a sentence. That's what my friend Georgie says. So I sat here last night, and it's a great place to sit. It's a great place to center. I do not know what this means. Mary did not come last night, and this was my first time seeing the show. And so I'm sure that this has important symbolism, but I can't tell you what it is. So now we're going to move on to Oh, no, wait, before we go, there's another piece by John here, John Levelhooks. And this is one of the really mathy ones. He uses triangulation and to take a traditional quilt pattern and morph it into this design, which then he backs with LED lights that are a non-repeating noise generation. There's more to it. I didn't really have any idea what he was talking about. But the interesting thing to me was that when he played music, it was as if it was timed to the lights were timed to the music and interacting with the music, and yet it's non-repeating, like for a million years or something. It isn't actually connected to the music, but it seems like it is, and you can play any kind of music, and it works. And then somebody this morning told me, and it's doing it to your voice too. So that's John's piece, and this is the beginning of where I wanted to talk about math as language. Algorithms are a language that computers understand, that are math-based, that we don't really understand, most of us. Another kind of language that is math-based, that we're all a little more familiar with because it comes from the 1800s, is Morse code. And this is Mi'kmaq. We're in those work. Mi'kmaq is from the Yellow Springs area. John's from Athens. Mi'kmaq is from the Yellow Springs area, or from Yellow Springs, which is between Dayton and Columbus, if you're not aware. And she has a long practice of work in a lot of different media that is about what we do understand and what we don't understand, where there's a gap in our understanding, a gap in our knowledge. Slippage is a word that she uses. And when we talked about the show, she created this installation for this exhibition in Morse code, which was developed in the 1800s and has been used primarily for transmission of information in wartime. And what she has chosen to do with it is to write out poems by women that are anti-war and anti-patriarchal, the kind of things that have to be hidden because you might get arrested or beaten for creating. So she has taken these poems, she has given us a translation on this table, but she has used a mathematical language to obscure them from us as well. The overall design is a Japanese style of hanging, and the French knots in red refer to a World War II tradition that Japanese women would embroider 1,000 red knots on white fabric and send with their soldiers into war to protect them. So again, it's someone who's taking their cultural background, their understanding of where they come from, and interacting with other cultures and bringing them together. This piece does something similar in Asian cultures where there was no way to secure documents with an institution. Documents would be sealed inside of fabric and stitched closed and then transferred in that way. This piece came out of a previous body of work that Mi'kmaq created for Photo Focus, which is a biennial that's mainly focused on photography. The theme this past year was archive. Mi'kmaq went to the Peace Museum archive and to Wright Pat Air Force Base, and then did an installation around the information that she gleaned from those archives. This piece was another piece she made when we were talking about the show of how numbers both define and obscure things, And so that's the combination of you see the number, you know the number refers to something, but you don't know what it refers to because you don't have the instructions. You don't have what it means. But you can tell what it is. She spent a lot of time in the gift store, and one of the things she got was a model airplane. And any of us of a certain age know what that is because we've all taken those little plastic parts off those little plastic grids.
Yeah.
So now we move into the final section of the gallery, in which actual theorems and math things are embedded in the work. You can't really see it. It's kind of an underlying thing in the work. We have two different people who work in weaving from the Cleveland area. This is Janice Lessman Moss, who's in Kent. And these pieces are digitally designed and then created by a computer-driven weaving machine, a Dobby. They are based on the random walk theorem, which when she heard random walk, she thought of Drunkard's Path, which is a traditional quilt pattern. But what it really was a theorem from the 1800s that was trying to predict the stock market. And so she took what was the physical shape of the random walk from this theorem, and then she morphed it through computer design into a weaving pattern that she then wove. And so the connection for her was that in the random walk theory, you're trying to create predictability, but you can't. The same is true for her. She never knows how her weavings are exactly going to come out. So all three of these are based on that random walk pattern theory. These pieces, this was my first artist visit in Cleveland, when I was in Cleveland. And so I went to Jessica's studio and I explained to her, she works at Praxis, which is a cooperative fiber shop in Cleveland. And she's lovely and really well respected and loved by the community there. And I explained to her what I was doing, because part of this was I was asking everybody I knew who knew any fiber artists, do you know anybody who does this stuff? Do you know anybody who works in that? And so Jessica said, oh, my sketchbooks are full of theorems. I come from this really mathy family, and we have chemical engineers and physicists, and so I was like, oh, this is going to be easy. And I'm going to be able to find tons of people who just work in that. Not really true. But her work, while it's clearly about the weaving itself, about pulling apart weaving, making weavings in a different way, she's very interested in materials. And so, for instance, in this one, she used commercial thread for the upper part, and then hand-spun yarn or thread for the bottom part, for the weft. I never remember. Weft. The weft. It's just the word. Thank you. Ask the weavers in the room. So this piece is actually called Pythagorean, on the Pythagorean theorem. So that was a clear one. It's this side of the triangle and that side of the triangle equal that side of the triangle, something like that. Feel free to correct me, math people. So, a very difficult thing to figure out how to make that happen on a loom. And then this one is it's called equal to, so it's the concept, the mathematical concept of equality, but it's also the cultural concept of equality. She's really referring to how do we make things equal or consider things equal that are different, which is an important question for us in society. And then we end with Judy Rush's work. Judy is from the Columbus area, and she has a body of work in felting and then also in quilting. These are loosely, I think she defines them as quilts, but perhaps just as wall hangings. These are based on the Fibonacci series, which is expressed in nature as a nautilus shell and a pine cone. It's when two numbers add up to the next number, and then those two numbers add up to the next number, and it creates a specific curve. What she does is she takes a digital photograph of, these are of her children, so it's a portrait, each one is a portrait. She goes into that computer image, that digital image, and makes Fibonacci curves all through the portrait. As she does that and obscures the portrait, she then chooses a part of it that she likes the composition for. And that becomes the portrait of her child. And then she iterates that in all of these layers and stitches of fabric, which she dyes the fabric and creates the threads. And they're so painterly and they're so lovely, and the math is so hidden. But it's the underlying structure. It's the underlying idea of something that is not clear. And so art and math, I think, have that in common for a lot of us. You know, we love it, but we don't always get it. We use it, but we don't always understand it. But it's really great to talk about and think about. So that's the show.
Thank you.